My mother-in-law made my wife leave me. He's going nowhere in life. They took our $3.80 million Oregon estate after the divorce. 6 months later, a lawyer showed up at my door with a briefcase. Her father wants to see you, he said. It's something that belongs to you. What I found inside left me breathless. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. My name is Jack Mason, and if you told me 2 years ago that my life would collapse this way, I'd have laughed. My wife, Elena, left me because her mother swore I'd never become anything. She said I was a failure, a man unworthy of her daughter's future, and somehow, she convinced Elena to believe it. They took everything in the settlement. The house I'd built with my bare hands, a $3.8 million coastal estate overlooking the Oregon cliffs, was gone. The dream I'd spent a decade building vanished overnight. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. I moved into a dim, half-broken apartment in Portland, the kind where the lights flicker and the walls echo when you breathe. The day Elena walked out, she didn't even look back. 6 months later, I was barely holding on. One evening, as rain poured outside, I heard a knock on my door, sharp, deliberate. When I opened it, a man in a navy suit stood there, holding a black briefcase. He said, "Mr. Mason, your ex-wife's father wants to meet you. He has something that belongs to you." I remember the sound of those words more than their meaning. Her father? I repeated, stunned. He nodded once, calm, professional. I stepped aside, confused. He didn't come in. He simply extended the briefcase slightly and said, "He asked me to deliver this, but he prefers to explain it in person." At that moment, I didn't know what to feel, anger, confusion, or disbelief. Elena's father, Thomas Hollingsworth, was a man of quiet wealth. He'd always stayed out of family drama, barely speaking even at our wedding. But now, after everything, he wanted to meet? Why? I stared at that briefcase, the rain dripping from his sleeve onto the hallway floor. For a second, I thought it was a cruel trick, something orchestrated by Elena's mother, Margaret Hollingsworth. A woman who could turn kindness into venom with a single look. Margaret had despised me since day one. She was the kind of woman who judged a man by the polish of his shoes and the brand of his watch. To her, I was nothing more than a man in dusty boots and calloused hands. I still remember one night, Thanksgiving, 5 years ago, when I tried to share a story about building a home for a young couple. Elena smiled softly at me across the table. "But Margaret?" She cut through my words with a laugh that could freeze fire. "Elena," she said, turning her attention to her daughter, "a man who swings hammers will never build you the life you deserve." The room fell silent. I forced a smile, swallowed hard, and took another sip of wine. Her words burned into me like acid, but I told myself love would drown out her poison. For a while, it did. Elena used to defend me, saying she believed in what I was building. We bought that coastal home together, and as my business grew, I poured every dime back into it. Every stone, every plank, every window was proof that I was worth something, proof I could give her the life she dreamed of. And when that house finally stood tall against the sea breeze, I thought I'd silenced Margaret for good. But poison doesn't vanish, it seeps. Over time, Elena started echoing her mother's words. "You work too much, Jack. Why can't we have more? You'll never be like the men my mother knows." Every phrase was a whisper carried from Margaret's lips to hers. My mother, Grace, saw it coming before I did. She used to visit, bringing pies and small smiles. She'd place her hand on mine and say, "Jack, don't let that woman make you forget who you are." But I was already slipping, too in love to see the storm forming. Then came the papers. Elena stood in our kitchen, the same one I'd tiled myself, and said, "It's over, Jack. Mother was right. You'll never be more than a failed dreamer." I'll never forget how calm her voice was, no tears, no hesitation. Just finality. The kind that ends lives, not marriages. The court hearings that followed were merciless. Margaret sat behind her daughter like a general watching her soldier finish the war she started. By the end, Elena had everything, the mansion, the savings, the cars. All I had left was a broken company, a battered pickup, and a soul cracked open. I walked out of that courthouse hollow. The Oregon sky was gray that day, fitting, really. Margaret looked at me one last time, smirk curling under her painted lips. She didn't need to say a word. Her eyes said it all, "You were never enough." I wish I could say I fought back. But I didn't. I just walked. The weeks after the divorce felt like falling through a tunnel with no bottom. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Portland, the kind of place where the air smelled like mildew and old paint. The wallpaper was peeling. The pipes moaned through the night. Every corner of that place reminded me of what I'd lost. The mornings were the hardest. I used to wake up to sunlight spilling through ocean view windows, Elena's soft breathing beside me. Now, the light came through blinds warped by heat, landing on an empty bed and an even emptier life. I worked odd construction jobs, patching roofs, fixing decks, anything that kept food on the table. My pride stopped me from asking for help, even when my brother, Daniel, offered. He'd come by some evenings, drop off groceries, and sit across from me with the same look of quiet worry. "Jack, you're letting them win," he'd say. But I couldn't hear him through the noise in my head. Margaret's voice lived there rent-free. "He'll never be enough, he'll never be enough." Some nights, I drank too much. Others, I just stared at the wall for hours, wondering where everything went wrong. Elena had moved on, that much was clear. A friend of mine, a subcontractor, told me she'd been seen driving around with someone new. Probably one of those successful men her mother always said she deserved. The thought made me sick, but what hurt more was knowing I wasn't surprised. I'd built my life on a foundation that looked solid, but underneath, it had been cracking for years. Now, I was living in those cracks. Every day felt like another reminder that I'd failed not just as a husband, but as a man. My mother tried to keep me afloat. Grace would visit on Sundays with her warm casseroles and her softer words. "Jack," she'd tell me, "a man's worth isn't counted in dollars or walls. It's in how he stands after he falls." She meant well. She always did. But standing felt impossible when everything inside you has already collapsed. Months passed that way, gray days blurring together. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Sometimes, I'd drive past the old mansion just to torture myself. From the street, I could see lights glowing through the windows, the life I'd built now belonging to someone else. And once, I saw a shadow of a man standing where I used to, inside the study, Elena's silhouette beside him. I didn't stop the truck. I didn't honk. I just sat there in silence, the rain tapping on the windshield, my chest heavy enough to sink me. That night, I came home and broke down. Not in anger, in surrender. I sat on the cold kitchen floor, my back against the fridge, staring at the unpaid bills spread across the counter. For the first time, I thought about giving up, not in a dramatic way, just quietly letting go. Letting the world forget I ever existed. Then came the knock. It was a Tuesday. Late afternoon. The air smelled like wet asphalt after a light drizzle. The sound was sharp, 3 knocks, steady, confident. Not a neighbor, not a delivery. Something in the rhythm made me stand up fast. When I opened the door, there he was. A tall man in a dark suit, maybe in his late 40s, holding a sleek black briefcase. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not my hallway. "Mr. Mason?" he asked. "Yes. My name is Samuel Dyer. I represent Mr. Thomas Hollingsworth." For a second, the name didn't register. Then it hit me, Elena's father. I froze. Samuel continued, calm and professional. "Mr. Hollingsworth would like to meet with you. He believes he has something that belongs to you." I blinked, unsure whether I'd heard him right. Something that belongs to me? I almost laughed. What could possibly belong to me anymore? My mind flashed through possibilities, a cruel prank, legal papers, maybe even a final blow orchestrated by Margaret. But Samuel's expression was steady, unreadable. "Can we talk inside?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. He stepped in carefully, eyes scanning the worn-out furniture and the cluttered table. "This won't take long," he said, setting the briefcase down. "Mr. Hollingsworth has requested a private meeting. If you're willing, I can drive you to his residence." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Why now?" I asked. He never spoke to me even when I was part of his family. Samuel nodded slightly, as if he expected the question. "Mr. Hollingsworth will explain that himself. But he wanted me to tell you this, it concerns something important. Something only you would understand." Those words cut through the fog. Something only I would understand. Against my better judgment, I found myself saying, "Give me 5 minutes." I grabbed my jacket from the chair, splashed cold water on my face, and followed him out. The car ride was silent. Portland city lights blurred past the window like a film running too fast. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to. Because deep down, I was afraid of the answers. After 30 minutes, the city faded into the suburbs, tall trees, wet streets, and quiet homes. Finally, the car pulled up in front of a large brick house. Not grand like the old mansion, but dignified. Old money. Quiet power. Samuel parked, turned to me, and said, "Mr. Hollingsworth is expecting you." My hands were trembling. I stepped out, the cool air biting against my skin. The front door opened before we even reached it. And there he was, Thomas Hollingsworth, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, standing with a cane in one hand and an expression I couldn't read. He said only one thing. "Jack, thank you for coming. We need to talk." The door closed behind me with a soft click, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at the man I once called family. Thomas Hollingsworth looked older than I remembered, thinner, slower, but his eyes still carried that same sharpness that made men listen. He motioned toward the study. "Come in, Jack." The house smelled faintly of tobacco and cedarwood. A clock ticked steadily somewhere down the hall, each second landing heavier than the last. Samuel followed me inside, placing the briefcase on the oak desk before stepping back quietly. Thomas sat down across from me. He rested both hands on his cane, then spoke in a tone that was calm, but heavy, the kind of voice a man uses when words carry weight. "I know what my wife has done," he said. "I know what my daughter did, and what it cost you." For a long time, I didn't say anything. His words hung in the air like fog. I hadn't come here expecting remorse. If anything, I thought he'd summoned me to twist the knife a little deeper. Finally, I managed. "You knew. You watched it happen." His jaw tightened slightly. "I did." He glanced at the briefcase. "And I've regretted my silence every day since." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You could have stopped it. You could have told them the truth." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes. I could have. But I didn't. That was my failure, not yours." He motioned to Samuel. The lawyer stepped forward and unlatched the briefcase. The metallic clicks echoed through the study like a gavel strike. When the lid lifted, I caught a glimpse of what was inside, stacks of legal documents, folders, and old photographs neatly arranged. Thomas pushed the case toward me. "These," he said, "belong to you." I stared at him, then down at the papers. "What is this?" He folded his hands over his cane. "Proof," he said softly. "Proof that the years you spent working for my company meant something. Proof that your hands built more than houses." I reached for the papers. Each page bore my name, ownership titles, shares, contracts. My breath caught as I flipped through them, realizing what I was holding. Land deeds, equity transfers, joint project rights, all tied to the Hollingsworth construction developments across Oregon. And all in my name. I looked up, stunned. "This can't be right," I said. "I didn't even know these existed." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "They existed because of you, Jack. You designed, supervised, and built those properties from the ground up. You worked when others quit. You solved problems that my own executives couldn't. Those developments made millions, and I let my family take the credit." My throat felt dry. "You're saying I own this?" He nodded. "It was always meant to be yours. I just didn't have the courage to make it right, until now." The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. For months, I'd been told I was nothing, a failure, a fool, a man who'd lost everything. Now, sitting here, I was holding the opposite in my hands. "But why?" I whispered. "Why now? After everything that's happened?" Thomas exhaled, his voice low and weary. "Because I've watched what Margaret did to this family. She turned love into leverage. And Elena, she became her mother's echo. I let it happen because I told myself it wasn't my place. But watching you lose everything, watching you break, that was the day I realized silence can be as cruel as betrayal." He paused, then tapped the briefcase gently. "This isn't a favor. It's restitution. You earned every bit of it. And I won't let my wife's poison erase a man like you." The words hit me harder than I expected. For 6 months, I'd lived convinced I was worthless. Now the man I thought had condemned me was handing me the very thing that proved my worth. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking. "I don't know what to say." Thomas leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "Then don't say anything. Just promise me this, rise again. Don't let their cruelty bury you. You were built for more than pain." My chest tightened. My vision blurred. It had been months since I cried, but now, I couldn't stop it. The tears came quietly, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of being seen again. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady my breath. When I looked up, Thomas was still watching me, not with pity, but with something close to pride. "Why me?" I asked finally. "You could have left this to your daughter." A faint, almost sorrowful smile touched his lips. "Elena never understood what mattered. And Margaret never wanted to. But you respected the work. You treated me like a man, not a paycheck. You asked questions. You listened. You built with your heart, not just your hands. I saw integrity in you long before my own family forgot what that word meant." The room went quiet except for the ticking of the clock. For the first time in years, I felt the weight on my shoulders shift, not vanish, but move. It wasn't grief anymore. It was something else. Something alive. Thomas pushed his chair back slightly. "This isn't charity," he said firmly. "It's acknowledgement. You built my empire, Jack. Now I'm giving you the tools to build yours." I nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. Somewhere inside me, something reignited, that old builder's fire I thought had died with the divorce. Thomas stood, leaning on his cane. He extended his hand. When I took it, his grip was steady and strong. "Don't thank me," he said. "Prove me right." And just like that, the meeting was over. When I stepped outside, the sky had begun to clear. The rain had stopped. I carried the briefcase to the car like it was a newborn child. Every second of the ride back, I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. I kept replaying his words, "Rise again." For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about revenge or loss. I was thinking about what came next. When I returned to my apartment that night, the place didn't look any different, the same flickering light bulb, the same creaking floorboards, the same faint smell of damp walls. But I wasn't the same man who'd walked out that morning. I set the briefcase down on the kitchen table and just stared at it. For months, that table had been a graveyard for overdue bills and unopened letters. Now it held something else, a second chance. I opened the briefcase again, laying the documents out one by one, studying each seal and signature. It was all real. The properties. The shares. The assets. Every piece of it tied back to work I had done years ago. I'd spent months believing I was a failure. Now, every line of legal ink said otherwise. I ran my hand through my hair and let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like suffocation. It felt like space, like the world was waiting for me to decide what came next. The next morning, I called my brother, Daniel. He picked up on the second ring. "Jack? Everything all right?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Better than all right. You might want to sit down." That evening, he came by. When I showed him the documents spread across the table, he blinked twice, then looked at me like he couldn't believe it. "Holy hell," he whispered. "You're serious?" I nodded. "Thomas gave them to me. Said I earned it." Daniel shook his head in disbelief. Then he grinned. "Guess the universe finally remembered your address, huh?" He clapped me on the shoulder, hard enough to spill my coffee. "You're not done, Jack. You were never done." Those words hit deep. The next few weeks were a blur of movement and purpose. I met with lawyers, signed transfer papers, and visited sites I hadn't seen in years. Each one carried ghosts of who I used to be, but this time, I wasn't haunted. I was home. I reopened my construction company under a new name, Ironwood Builders. I started small, a handful of projects, a few old crew members who still believed in me. And slowly, piece by piece, I built again. The first project was a modest coastal home for a retired couple. Nothing fancy, just solid, honest work. But when I stepped onto that site, smelling the sawdust and salt air, I felt alive. Each hammer strike was a heartbeat. Each wall that went up was a reminder that I hadn't been defeated, only delayed. My mother, Grace, visited one afternoon. She walked into the office, her eyes wide and teary as she looked around. "Jack," she whispered. "You did it." I smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "I'm just getting started." She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "I always knew you'd rise again." And for once, I believed her. By the end of that year, Ironwood Builders was thriving. We'd taken on 3 major contracts, enough to clear my debts, stabilize my finances, and bring life back to a name I thought had been buried under divorce papers. I moved out of that tiny apartment and into a small home near the Oregon coast. It wasn't a mansion, not even close, but it was mine. When I woke up in the mornings, the sunlight spilled across the floorboards, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. Sometimes, when I stood by the window, I'd catch a reflection of myself, older, wearier, but somehow stronger. The man staring back wasn't the broken one Elena left behind. He was the man who rebuilt himself from ashes. I heard rumors about Elena and Margaret. Their grand estate had become a burden, too costly to maintain without my steady income. Word spread that Elena had tried to sell it, but no one wanted to buy a house soaked in so much bitterness. Margaret's health had begun to fade, her once commanding voice now barely a whisper. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Their lives weren't mine anymore. My victory wasn't in their fall. It was in my rise. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood outside my new home and breathed in the sea air. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine, the same scent that had followed me all those years ago when I built the house for Elena. Only this time, the air didn't sting. It felt like freedom. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out one of the old photographs Thomas had given me and my crew, years ago, standing in front of the first Hollingsworth project I'd ever completed. We were younger then, tired but proud, with mud on our boots and laughter in our eyes. And I realized something. Thomas hadn't just given me money or property. He'd given me back my identity. I wasn't the man Margaret said I was. I wasn't a failure. I was a builder, always had been, always would be. Time has a way of reshaping pain. Months passed, and the heaviness that once clung to my chest began to fade, not because I forgot, but because I learned. Each nail I drove into wood, each foundation I poured, felt symbolic now, like I wasn't just rebuilding homes, I was rebuilding myself. The same hands that once shook with defeat were steady again, covered in sawdust and purpose. One morning, as I looked out over the job site, men laughing, the sun cutting through the mist, I realized something profound. My story had never been about losing a wife or a mansion. It was about remembering who I was when everything else was taken away. My mother, Grace, still visited every Sunday. She'd bring her casseroles, hug me too long, and say, "You see, Jack? The good Lord doesn't close doors, He rebuilds them." Her faith, quiet but strong, had carried me through storms I didn't think I could survive. And Thomas Hollingsworth, I never forgot what he did for me. He passed away a year later, peacefully in his sleep. When I attended his funeral, Margaret barely met my eyes. Elena wasn't there. I placed a single white rose on his coffin and whispered, "Thank you, for seeing me when no one else would." After that day, I stopped looking back. One evening, I returned to the Oregon cliffs near where our old mansion once stood. The property was overgrown now, ivy crawling over the stone walls, the sea breeze carrying the faint smell of salt and rain. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty windows that once framed my dreams. And instead of pain, I felt peace. That house had been my pride once. But now, it was just a shell, a reminder that walls and wealth mean nothing if the foundation is built on someone else's expectations. I turned away, walked back to my truck, and drove home, to my modest little house, the one I'd built with my own hands. The one that smelled like sawdust and coffee and second chances. Inside, I hung a single framed note above my workbench, words Thomas had written to me in his final letter. A man's worth isn't given. It's proven in how he builds, and how he rebuilds when everything falls apart. Those words became my compass. Whenever doubt crept in, I'd read them and remind myself, I wasn't the man they left behind. I was the man who rose again. Now, if you're watching this and you've been where I was, broken, abandoned, convinced the world's done with you, listen to me. You're not finished. You're just in the middle of your story. Pain is temporary, but what it teaches you lasts forever. People will doubt you. They'll define you by your lowest moment. But they don't get to write your ending, you do. When the people you love walk away, when your dreams collapse, when everything you've built turns to dust, remember this. Dust is what builders start with. So build again. Even if it's slow. Even if it hurts. Even if no one believes in you yet. Because one day, when you stand tall again, when you breathe freely and see light where there used to be shadows, you'll realize the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right. I'm Jack Mason, once the man they called a failure. Now, the man who proved them wrong by living, building, and rising again. If my story moved you, or if it reminded you of your own strength, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video so it reaches more hearts, leave a comment, and tell me, how did you rise after life broke you? And don't forget to subscribe, because every story here carries a reminder. No matter who tries to define you, you can always rebuild. Because broken doesn't mean beaten. It means reborn.